Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Wishing Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. My wonderful guest tonight is Dr. Richard Allen Miller. It's one of a kind, brilliant man. It's so wonderful to have you on board tonight. I told you your knowledge is needed. We really need you here. So I'm glad that you're on the timeline with us.
I'm working with a group of millenniums in Texas, and they're going to come down all the way from Texas to follow me up to Nanaimo in British Columbia to film all the different weird people I might meet on these different workshops that I'm doing. And while most of the workshops, the 8-hour intensives, will be around sustainable lifeboats and how to set up perimeters, I'm also going to be doing one on power tools where 2 hours are going to be spent on the mats teaching a special form of Tai Chi. The kind that's outlined in my book, and how to change the perception of time with breath control. Once you learn how to control breath control, now you have a tool for altering your state of consciousness. And some of that is very useful. It made the boxing of SEAL Team 1 verge on paranormal. It took 6 months for me to train them on how to do that. You start with straws blowing bubbles, and then you move to didgeridoos, and it all ends up just like in Kill Bill, playing an Indian flute like Kenny G.
Those are hard to play.
Well, there's different. I have two kinds of didgeridoos. I have a practice one, and then I have an Aborigine one. And the Aborigine ones are difficult because they're larger and wider mouthed than the smaller, longer. You're
pretty good with that.
I'm sorry?
You're pretty good with that without the instrument.
I can do that now with a pipe of Pan, and I'll show you anger. Kenny G will come on stage and the band will be playing, and everybody wants to know where Kenny G is, and he's in the back of the audience blowing a single note while he walks up to stage. And that is the place where, when you can do that, you can take your martial arts to a whole another level of achievement. My thing was in double sword. Double sword is the 8th kata in double yang style of Tai Chi, where you use 2 swords to extend your chi 30 inches. It is done. The movement is, if you study the movement of Tai Chi, it is precision in terms of using weapons. And the movement, like the ward off where you're walking through a crowd, the one I do is the yin yang of blocking someone hitting my face and my crotch at the same time, and I'm walking through a crowd and I create a yin yang symbol as I block off 6 people. And that was how I became the ghost in Potlatch when I was asked to walk the gauntlet to become a member of the tribe, Sitka tribe. And I did it paranormally rather than running. I walked through it, and as each person took their swing at me, I went down into this place where I was able to watch the blow go by me as just in slow motion and have the precision of not being touched walking the gauntlet. And that's why my Indian name is the Ghost. It's like in the Phantom, the Ghost Who Walks. It is a technique that is very rare. I studied this when I was at Shai Beach up near Hole in the Wall in Washington State. There's this beach that there's no way you can get onto the beach except at low tide. The tunnel that you can go through during low tide was carved about 1,000 years ago, and it lends out onto Shai Beach. And I spent 6 months there on the beaches without anything, studying with Strong Eagle. And that's basically learning the songs and dances. And that's what medicine is, because it's an oral tradition, just like the Kabbalah. Kuba'al, or QBL, is Kabbalah, means word of mouth. It was an oral tradition. And Enemy Mine depicted that concept when you sing your medicine to your children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. It's interesting you talk about the weapons and the swords too, because it's an extension of your chi if you're using them correctly. So it makes perfect sense.
And with the mind, the brain is what projects the psyche into matter.
That's right. And that's what's so concerning about the 5G and all this technology that's designed to control, manipulate brainwave activity. Because when you're interfering with a narrative or type of, whether it's synthetic telepathy or anything else, you're compromising the brain chemistry and the state of consciousness of the target, right?
That's why all saints in history stress the importance of training the mind, meditation. The only thing is, that takes you to bliss states, which, been studied extensively up in Ottawa. Others like on the dimethyltryptamine, these neurotransmitters are actually, you can feel them in your body when they're released, just like you can feel your heart rate change. It takes instrumentation measuring your heart rate to teach you how to lower your heart rate. I went into my doctor's the other day, and I was excited from coming off the street and weird driving. And so I was at 151 over 87. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to have to put you on meds because at 74, you're supposed to be at 130 over 75. And if you're above that, I'm either going to have to put you on meds, fire you." And I looked at him and I said, "Cuff me again." I dropped it down to 129. Now, that took me years of study using biofeedback to learn how to control my heart rate, pulse, respiration, and temperatures in various parts of my body. I'm doing the same studies now on the release of 8 different neurotransmitters. And the chill that goes up your spine, you can feel this little chill that goes up. That's the release of dimethyltryptamine that creates an electrostatic field that causes a light beam to stimulate philia on the nervous system, shooting a light beam straight up the spine. And if you do that correctly, and straighten it just right, you can stimulate the pineal gland, which is right there at the occipital region, at what we call the inion, where that bone is in the back of your head. And if you can stimulate that, what happens next is you cause the neural cavity to turn into a resonant cavity oscillator. And once that's happening, if you have the right nutrients up there in your brain, you can now generate true nerve tissue rather than glial cell. That means you can reproduce, nerve tissue that has been degenerating instead of glial cells. I think most humans stop producing true nerve tissue at around age 20 or 24. And I, at the age of 40, went in a battery of doctors with a technical paper that Robert O. Becker and I wrote on the regeneration of a severed perineal at my knee. My knee was crushed against a brick wall by an automobile, and the nerve was severed, and I had drop foot. And it took me 4.5 months doing what we call visualization exercises, and it took 4.5 months jumping on a trampoline to drop the neurotransmitters down the central nervous system, which have the viscosity of vitamin E, and regenerating a severed nerve trunk.
Nice.
So people that have palsy, there's ways you can eliminate these things. And I'm writing about these in my writings as parts of how you achieve your own forms of immortality, which has many faces.
Right. Well, let me ask you one thing. If I believe that too, that we can actually regenerate and completely transcend so many different things. But the problem we're running into is this misuse of covert warfare, which literally is designed to damage us. So how do we rectify that?
Black goo. Yeah, well.
I mean, I'm talking the radio transmissions in general, just the stuff we were touching on, the 5G and everything else. How do we negate some of this?
Radio bandwidth. Yeah, that's what Hutchinson effect did, essentially, with Montauk and the studies that they were trying to do and using radio frequency waves to camouflage a ship. And a phenomena occurred where there was a change in space-time, and biological organisms got merged with steel, and like spaces collided, if you would. That was Dr. Schleicher's work. He was my boss. He was also known as the Smoking Man out of Washington, D.C.
Was he?
Yeah, that's Dr. Carl Schleicher, a.k.a. the Smoking Man. I'm not Mulder, but I did. My teacher was Andrea Puharich. I was the guy that went into SRI and caught Uri Geller cheating. The problem was, and is, that even though he was the real deal, the fact that he was caught cheating puts all of his stuff in question. And that was a tragedy, because a lot of wealthy women were hanging around Uri Geller. Oh, will you destroy my watch? Will you bend my spoon? And he, like May, cannot just do this at will. That's what I'm exploring, how to do this with conscious volition. And because he couldn't just do it whenever he wanted to, started to cheat. Cheating is what got the whole thing not being studied properly again. Right. And see, that's the real problem, isolating what's actually a variable and what is not, and to be able to identify what are the assumed truths going on here. When the reason ESP is now associated with instinct is because of the studies at Mission Control in 1971 with Edgar Mitchell and James Hurtak and Theodore Pirikos. I did those studies. I met Edgar Mitchell in 1970. My mentor, Dr. Stanley Krippner, held a symposium in New York called The Energies of Consciousness. It's in a book by Gordon and Breach, The Energies of Consciousness. And in that book, they talk about, I had written a paper on Carillion photography and what it was and what it was not. It was actually secondary emission of electrons. And that study that I did led to the MRI at Washington State University, where I did my undergraduate work. That is basically where imaging, medical imaging first occurred, was an offshoot of Carillion photography and so-called seeing auras. Now, everybody sees auras. What you're doing is when you look at somebody, if it's very bright, you will have an after shadow because of the way the cones and rods work in your eye. And that basically is a type of hallucination. You're not actually seeing the aura. That's how it's brought to your attention in consciousness. And what you're trying to do is develop a language going from one subset of universes where the laws are different to the known universe of consciousness. And that is the new direction in physics, is the study of altered states of consciousnness as tools in the toolbox. Medicine, for example, is now moving toward hallucinogens, pharmaceutical mushrooms, psilocybin, as a healer in both physical and spiritual levels of health.
Yeah, I saw that article too. They were talking about helping with depression or something like that too.
Well, then there it is. It's that is the new medicine. Will be not Prozac and Nitol or sniffing glue. It will be I've seen it all, and I'm watching how our universe is changing so quickly that the study of these altered states is actually the next evolution in man's study of consciousness.
Well, don't you think the cure for healing anybody would just be vibration and frequency anyway? We don't really need any type of any placebos.
I mean, we don't need air. We can be a breatharian. We don't.
I've heard of that too. I don't know if you tried it. I think maybe in a couple of centuries.
Wait, I'll tell you what. The very fact that you can envision that as a possibility makes it a probability. That is a very famous statement by Arthur in the book by T.H. White, when he said to Arthur, anything not specifically forbidden is mandatory. If it's possible, you can count on it. That came from a Pict. And so it's an Aborigine. That's what Merlin was a pick. And when you realize that these knowledge bases have been passed down for more generations than we can count, the Aborigines are far more aware of what's going on globally right now than the Trabander or even the Koryak or the Inuit. The Hopi and Navajo are only 5,000 years old. Mm-hmm. You go back to the Inuit and their history of song, medicine, what happened in the songs of how the sea got its water, salt in it, and from the crying baby, couldn't catch up with the mother. Yeah, that part of medicine is more than, I can't even fathom how it is with the Aborigines of Australia up in Adelaide. And they just held a big conference, and the conclusions are the elders of those people now are saying the end of days, and they've never said the end of days. Mm-hmm. Said the end of days is between now and 2020. And by 2024, we will look back, what few of us remain, and wonder how we made it through there.
Wow. What about Yellowstone? Any updates on that? I sent you an article too.
The thing that you did in Wyoming and up there in the Tetons, the Grand mm-hmm. Tetons, the tits of the lady. Well, here we are with Woody Harrelson. Bring it on. What is that going to be? That Zombieland 2. We've got a sequel coming out. It's so wonderful. I love Zombieland, and the double tap rule. I have to say that I don't know what is about to happen, but you can count on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like there's something moving around there a little bit here and there. So just curious.
Yellowstone, when it goes, is going to create a big problem for a lot of people. And the New Madrid fault line right now has 21 active Daiichi-like reactors, all leaking. And when that goes underwater, you are going to have a region on Earth that it will be probably like a forbidden zone. Can't go there.
That's why I say off planet.
Well, the Indian Creek is leaking into the Hudson. I don't even want to think about what's going down in Florida. Everything is leaking.
Yeah, everything's becoming very, very toxic. There's no doubt. I skipped over that question early on when we first started the show, but somebody was asking about, do you agree that spiritual problems cannot be handled by human logic?
Well, they're spirituals. Spirituality is not what you do, but how you do it. Mm-hmm. It is the quality of intensity in what you do one thing over another, and distinguishes the distinction between ethics and morals. And spirituality is a plane. You have the physical plane, and that's IQ. And then you have the emotional plane above it, which is how you feel about the physical plane. And that's why we call it EQ. And it's a metaphor. Again, a higher level of detail. And spirituality is a higher level of the physical plane. It's not what you do that's important, it's how you do it. I love the quote from Batman. It is not who you are that defines you, but what you do that defines you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Spirituality is a higher level of physical reality, and a quality in which of intent. Now, intent is not purpose. Intent comes from a place of wounding. Some women have had a bad father experience, and so they're reticent on sexual prowessness. It's an armoring kind of thing. You come from a place of wounding. However, one of the protocols that I trained SEALs was your limitations are actually blessings, because those limitations come as a double edge, and my anger can be used to clean a floor better than you can.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So before we hit the break too, I wanted to ask you, we almost we Well, actually, the Groom Lake thing that was going on. You mentioned. What was your connection to Groom Lake?
I was studying for the military paranormal studies, not aliens. At the time I studied paranormal studies, we knew about aliens, but we were more worried at that time, literally, about what the Russians were doing. The level of concern about alien intervention now has reached a whole new level that was different at the time I was studying it. So how I got to Groom Lake was I was invited by request from a captured alien called Krill. And I was brought down 8 levels into Groom Lake. And I was in this one room for 1 hour with a large table, bigger than my dining room table. It seats 12. And there were stacks of documents, of which I just started grabbing and looking at. The door opened. When the door opened, there was this entity, 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. And that's all I remember. I remembered she felt feminine. I couldn't understand how I could be hearing her voice inside my head. That led me to later write and study synthetic telepathy as a way to try to better understand how she was communicating using my temporal lobes, not voice. I was in that room, I have no idea. It might have been an hour longer. I don't think it was. They say it was like 30 minutes. Something happened. I have no memory. I am slowly attempting to try to open those doors of memory because they're there. I can see them, but I can't get to them. It's like you can see the guy's name in your mind's eye, but you can't remember how to pronounce the name. Yeah, it's like that.
Right.
And it comes in flashes and is probably for what I'm doing right now. I have no idea. They spent more than 2 weeks and a number of different kinds of drugs, pentothal, other things to break down what I remember of the event. And I can't get there. I don't know why.
Wow. What year was that?
74.
1974. That's fascinating. What do you think happened to that alien? Do you know what happened to the alien?
Yeah. Whitley Strieber wrote about it.
Oh.
Majestic. Yeah. The alien just disappeared. At one point, after 30 years in deep isolation and lockdown, the alien just walked out. Nobody saw it. Gone. What? It was there for a purpose. I don't think it was at Roswell that they had that alien body that they did an autopsy on. But when that autopsy was completed, a 4th alien appeared and wanted the body because they apparently could reanimate that entity in force space. And it was offered to Harry Truman, a live entity, that we could study how such things as the liver. I mean, it had organs that, because it was a dead thing, we'd pull this thing out. What is it? Is it a liver? Is it a heart? What is it? How does it work? When it wasn't animated, you couldn't study it. And so having a live alien was far superior. Apparently, there were 2 dead aliens that they found, and then they found a dying alien. And when the dying alien died, they did the autopsy, and a 4th alien appeared, and that was known as Krill. And I remember it's so hard. It's like it's right there, and you can't get it. She sounded feminine, and she was tall, like a long neck, maybe 6 or 8 inches, where ours is 3 and 4 inches. This was like a very long neck, very slender body, and was apparently wearing something, but you didn't see the seams even at the neckline, like it might have been the whole body, like surrounding the whole thing. I don't know. What I saw was something that was naked, did not have any sex to it, and did not open its mouth.
Wow. What color was it?
Gray.
It was gray. Okay. Do you remember? Do you think they had blood, or was it something else they had inside?
I have no idea. I didn't.
I was just curious.
Well, I don't know. And the thing was, I went down there, had 1 hour to brief myself on all these different papers that had been written, and then the door opened. And I remember I went, and the air pressure and the thing slid apart, and I remember that brief moment of seeing her, and then everything is blank.
Very interesting.
Like coming out of surgery, I woke up to consciousness, and I don't know. There's no question that what I do now, I'm driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I ascribe some of that to that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had other moments that were pivotal in my development. And each one stands out so sharply, like that moment at Deception Pass on LSD with Timothy Leary in 1964. And him, I'm looking down, just totally blasted. I was 20 years old. I've never even heard of hallucinogens, much less LSD. Never smoked pot. Didn't do morphine or, the reefer madness thing. And I remember Harvard, it was still legal before Andrew Weil got involved. And I remember Larry coming to talk first to my mother and then my professor at Washington State University. And then that's when I met Larry. And I was, what they wanted to do is experiment on a drug with a genius to see what would happen. And I was not the only one they did this with. There was, I think, Jack Sarfati. There was a couple of others in other parts of the country. I was highest IQ ever measured in Washington State. And I didn't think much about it because my parents were really good about that part of things. I didn't make a big deal. They wouldn't allow me to be specially trained. I just did unusual things as a kid. I built a linear accelerator and, did those kinds of things.
So you did a lot of inventions as a child.
Well, I was an experimental physicist. Anytime I used my hands to build something, it worked.
Nice. Very cool. Did you get the information? Was it a download? I mean, how did you receive your data?
My father taught me everything. He taught me how to solder. He was working as a plasma physicist at the Boeing Scientific Research Laboratories at South Park when I was a kid. When I came out of graduate school, that's where Boeing sent me before it later became the Space Center in Kent. And I worked under a man named Art Pilgrim with Lunar Base Alpha 1. And cool. I got interviewed 20 years later. I think it was High Times interviewed me on growing pot on the moon. That's February 1992 in High Times. The interview with Richard Allen Miller and growing pot on the moon, Lunar Base Alpha 1. Hemp was one of the 6 crops that we were exploring. I was doing the light studies. That's what got me into agriculture in the first place. And I remember we were growing cannabis indica because it was equivalent to a long ultraviolet, which was pretty much what we had if we were on a geodesic dome in space, flying in space. That's what it basically was a closed system. We had clean room standards. We had chicken inside running around under our feet, even though we were in weird uniforms, and they were pooping through grates that dropped in and fed the chlorella. And then we had tilapia that was eating milkfish that was eating it as a closed system that was called hydroponics and later aquaculture. And that is one of the reasons why I am the postman, setting up sustainable farms and lifeboats across the country. I learned how to farm, and the military let me do that. For 35 years, I have a 9-volume encyclopedia, Alternative Agriculture. If you want to put a field crop in, I'm your huckleberry. I can do that. That's what I'm a farmer. That's what I do. And
nice.
And what I'm doing, I've discovered, because I interviewed Bill Mollison, permaculture. I interviewed Fukuoka, One Straw Revolution. I've interviewed these people for Acres USA, and discovered that each habitat is unique in its subsystems and requires a special set of laws, just like altered states do. And I'm now learning the mycorrhiza in the soil is Gaia's stomach. There's a woman up in UBC forestry that talks about the mother tree in a forest that sends off electromagnetic signals through the mycorrhiza to warn the younger trees of a forest fire or impending drought. And these plants then react just like you do in your body, where your first movement starts in the gut, which is a hierarchy of resonant cavity oscillators, going from viruses to bacteria, and bacteria to small organisms, and small organisms into larger ones. And that resonance is what takes it outside space-time. And you have that as a type of hologram. My original papers in the 70s talked about the idea that the DNA was a three-dimensional hologram of fourth space, who you were, who you are, who you will be. And then, more recently, I'm writing suggesting that the brain is a four-dimensional hologram of five space. And using that concept allows me to state that I can change the movie by going to different places in the brain.
Yep, exactly. And we have a question here in the chat. It says, did they have bones or cartilage as a skeleton? I believe they're talking about those extraterrestrials.
I don't know. I just saw this entity. I didn't get to touch it. I didn't get to get close to it. At all times, we stood motionless. That's why the debriefing was so creepy. They wanted to know what happened, and I couldn't explain. I didn't know. And yet, the entity was like 30 feet away. It was over there at the other side of the room, looking at me, and we just stood there for, it felt like forever. Like surgery. You don't have a sense of time. It's gone. And then all of a sudden they're waking you up and it's all over and you're coming back into normal reality. And how are you feeling? Oh, I'm tired. I don't know. It was a very, very, I can't put my word on it. It was unworldly. Moving. Yeah, very moving experience.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a one in a lifetime too. I mean, I can't imagine anybody really having that kind of an experience. So very few people have had that access.
I think there's more people that are having that experience. And that's why there's been some concern about the alien, is that I think from the readings I've done and the people I know, like Carol Rosin and others that talk to me on a more personal level at dinner parties and things, I think that there's something else going on here, and that we are in a transition stage going from Homo sapien to something more like 8 Sense, that series on Netflix. I don't know how that works yet. Hive mind, group mind. I don't understand that yet. I sense presence of similar people. I used to be able to I used to believe when I was younger that I could tell what ray or planet or star system they were from by looking into their eyes. The Pentashads talk about that with what they call rays of light, or the 7 chakras that emit different colors, working Blu-ray or, your movie set. I don't know. I don't know how that all works. I'm saying these are models of definitions trying to articulate a metaphor. And that's where the difficulties come in, because we don't have any words for that. And so the very famous Jungian phrase is as if. It's as if. And the as if part is where John Bohm tried to distinguish different similarities over similar differences.
Mm-hmm.
And the way of grouping subsets of information like a hologram. A hologram is described as n dimensions of information in n minus 1 dimensions. That's my definition. That would suggest that it is the way information collapses into or expands out of itself into the next set or levels of information, like a fractal.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Yeah.
Mandelbrot, Julia, and May patterns, which are generators. I'm guessing there are other ones, and they're all related to sacred geometry. And why mathematics seemingly is the way that we codex everything from one subset to another. There's a mathematician, Avram Moles, that writes about that, called aesthetic perception and information theory. And what he does is he talks about the distinguishing differences between something like Hebrew, Old Hebrew, which has less redundancy than English does in mother languages. The Hebrew had conveyed more, and their sciences, which probably are the Bible. I bet the Bible could be seen as a textbook on sciences coming from the more emotional set of places where you have such books as the Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Formation, that talks about sound and its relationship to words, and the importance of describing the Word of God, Yad He Vahe, and the way you would say it would lift rocks and stones. I've watched Tibetan Buddhists bring out these big long horns like they blow in the Andes or the Alpine. Oh, and when they do that in a certain mathematical geometry of 13 horns, I've watched very large stones move. And so as a metaphor, I might suggest that the spacecraft crashed on the other side of the moon is most likely Tibetan, previous epoch. And that's how I'm studying the phenomena around me now. I'm realizing there's way more going on here. And like the Clovis, we've been here before.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, hopefully we don't have to come back again.
I don't know. Hope, of course, if you like the Greek concepts again, was the last evil in Pandora's box. And the reason I would say it that way is that like the god Chrome and Conan, waiting for a gift from the god, good luck with that. What gets the job done is persistence, not unrewarded genius.
Mm-hmm. Truly. Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
There's not much any place to go with any of this. Once you realize that knowledge is illusion, isn't it amazing that the more you know, the more questions you have, which means you can't get there from here. Simon says you can go halfway to the door, and everybody gets excited because they're going toward the door. The thing is, you never get there because it's not about the door, it's about the journey.
Right. And there is no door, right? They were already there anyway.
Exactly. Are we there yet?
Yeah, totally.
And like the pastor, this is one I like to use. The minister says, "Is that house white or brown?" And the correct answer is yes.
Nice. Well, very true to some degree, I guess.
Pretty much it's punctuated and everybody in dead silence thinking about it. That's where it all happens. Is in your imagination. And just while I'm talking, everyone listening to me has probably gone into more than 100 different universes. this last hour. And each one of those universes has laws in it that are unique, distinctly different than the other one. And that's what I'm doing now, which has kind of been, in some ways, hazardous because, like Madame Curie, I don't know what I'm messing with, and I don't know the rules and the shortcuts to Grandma's house. If you look at the Tree of Life and realize the only place where knowledge is important is in the middle of the sea of chaos, or Karanzan, above Tipworth, or Christ consciousness, but before God consciousness, union with God. And that in between is that Doth place. And they try to suggest that knowledge through wisdom is a very temporary place, like a rock underwater in the middle of a large raging stream. And to leap out into the raging stream, nobody sees the rock, and you can't stand on the rock. But what you can do is jump with one step over to the other side of the river safely, where you use that rock as doth. A temporary dotted line in the Tree of Life is the 10th or missing Sephiroth. And it's all in metaphor. That's why the Kabbalah is so rich. It has less redundancy. And to use a tarot of the various paths going from Chicago to Cincinnati is like path working. And what you have to do is identify where you are, what stories are going on, and then realize the endings of each story and how they play with the other endings. And then you change the movie to meet your purpose.
Well said. I agree with you. Totally. Have you been to Antarctica, by the way, or no?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have been to Antarctica. I was not team leader on that one. I worked under an anthropologist. She brought a team in, and the reason I was brought in is because of my academic backgrounds in bioluminescence. I was the physicist in charge of trying to figure out how the light worked in this big cavern. We were in a cavern under, you come in from Brazil, you come around that one island, and then you go into a submarine and go down under in. And there's a cavern in there that's over a mile high. It's so high, a mile cavern, huge. And there's wind and clouds and weather, rain. I didn't see snow, but I've been told there was snow there's snow at certain times of the year. Snows, it actually snows. And then there was that 19, they're disrepair and destroyed, but there's slips for 19 submarines from the Nazi base. And then you go 7 miles, 8, down toward, I guess it's more toward the South Pole. And what you encounter is a Viking base from the 14th century. And near there is a large hole that at the time I was there, we did not have the technology to go down. It goes straight down 100 miles is what we measured it. At that time, we didn't have the technology to be able to go down that hole. And from physics point of view, it had to have some kind of force field because at that depth, the heat turned stone into plastic. And yet everything was there. I recently heard that there was a bunch of dignitaries, including Buzz Aldrin, that went down that hole. And they discovered something. My guess, I have no idea what it was. My guess is they found Nephilim in stasis.
Well, wait a second. Now, you said it was how many feet down?
100 miles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
100 miles. Straight down is a hole going straight down 100 miles.
Very, very interesting.
Well,
you don't think there's I was going to say, is there an outlet there maybe to access space easier from that point if they go down?
I don't know. The movies, the Stargate movies, who knows? I can tell you that I did study stargates. We didn't know where they were. We knew about them in the 70s, and it wasn't until the 80s that they were actually discovered. Basically, the Church of Rome, issued by Joseph Isaiah, he's a Jesuit, wrote a book called Devil Worship, or The Secret Tradition of the Yazidi. This is a tribe up in the northern part of Iraq that live in the tundra up there that has got catacombs. And when the first Bush went in to invade Iraq, the whole thing was to find that Stargate. It's written about in the Secret Traditions of the Yazidi. It's a book I have. It was written in 1921, and that's how you discover star artifacts. Is that they're written about in history, and they make no sense, like the giant skulls that were discovered in 1820 in Pennsylvania and went straight to the Smithsonian and are now missing. I got interviewed on a BBC on that one, and I had a model or a theory on what happened there, where they're out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, because the two brothers that formed the Smithsonian probably were trying to vet their father, who was that Baptist, was Presbyterian Baptist. He was a Baptist minister, I think it was, that dogged the Mormon, what was his name, that took that flock from his congregation. And for the next 20 years, that priest tried to get his religion back from Joseph, what was his, Joseph Smith, that formed the Mormon church. And to find a skull like that would validate the possibility of aliens, which, by the way, the Mormon church was formed on as a close encounter. And they probably dumped that skull. But we're finding those skulls everywhere in Russia and China now. And there's evidence everywhere of Nephilim. I don't know about Anunnaki and some of that stuff they're finding down in central Peru, but it's all interesting. And it's going to be a bumpy ride. And so I'm going to recommend you all buckle up.
Or get another ship out of here.
Well, it's going to be a tough. The next couple of years are going to be pretty challenging for everybody.
Right.
And one of the most important things you could be taking care of from a physical plane point of view is making sure you have your water source laid out and organized. Water will be the thing that kills most people.
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that one.
People can't even tell, don't know how to tell if potable water is drinkable or not. And I'm going to workbook 3, which is part of the Power Tools series, is going to be about how a 3rd grade school kids drive a water testing laboratory to 1st graders, showing them how to test water for purity, and then how the 1st grader goes home and shows their parents how they did it.
That's good. Also, location of water,
Well, everybody has water. Is it drinkable? I doubt it. And I'm not even sure what's coming out of wells anymore.
Oh,
I've noticed
bad.
all the trees in Oregon are dying. And I don't know if it's from Fukushima, chemtrails, lack of water,
probably.
or I don't know what's going on.
What kind of trees are dying over there?
Ponderosa.
All kinds? Oh, Ponderosa pines?
Yeah, it is an oak. Oak death, we have sudden oak death, and we have the bark beetle and all of that. But this is different. And every single Ponderosa is now showing stress. Yeah. Usually there's a 1 or 2% kill on the leaf or the needle. The trees are now showing 12 to 20% damage.
Yep. Yeah, we have that here in Colorado too.
What's causing that? Is it chemtrails, Fukushima?
I think it's chemtrails. Personally, I think it's a combination between the dry temperatures, but also chemtrails.
That's another thing that's very difficult to confirm what it is not, because I know that the Navy deployed lithium in one of their studies in Reedsport a few Thanksgivings back to see if they could lock down a small city. The primary use of chemtrails today is to create a nuclear shield from incoming ICBMs. The particulate that's in the air, you hit that with a laser, and it will stop an incoming missile. It won't stop the EMP strike, pulse, from putting us back in the Stone Age, but the nuclear radiation part of that missile coming in, that's what it is. It's a radiation shield. And that thing, they hit it with a certain kind of a laser, and it sets up a electromagnetic field that will stop incoming missiles.
Very
And
interesting.
that's just one use of it. That's just one possibility. Another is to change the weather. Another is to lock down a city with lithium, sedate everybody. Another one is, there's all of it is true. And what it's really about is what they call plausible deniability, and that every single thing you could possibly imagine is true and more. That's what makes chemtrails creepy, is that nobody's coming out with definitive. And when you have something like, what is it, Carnegie Mellon, major university, with 27 out of 30 peer reviews saying chemtrails is nothing more than contrails, that's a lie. I've got pictures where the emission is coming from one engine but not the other. How does that work?
Right.
I've seen the inside of craft. I've had my SEAL team vetted. The ones here in Oregon are coming out of Chilliwack, the ones that are flying high up at 50,000 feet. They're unmarked aircraft. They turn around at Klamath Falls, and they go the chemtrails both directions, going to Chilliwack, Klamath Falls. Now, that's here on the West Coast. I don't know about the Midwest and the East Coast and things like that. I know in Russia, there are less. I know that since Trump has been in office, there are less than they used to be with Obama. I don't know what any of it means.
Well, hopefully better things are happening around the corner. But I know we're almost out of time here. Can you believe it? It's been a wonderful show to have you on tonight. I'm so glad you joined us. So I want to thank you. And I want to make sure that you let everybody know how to get in touch with you and also how to purchase your books once again before we forget.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's my website, richardallenmiller.com. And by the way, because of the metaphysics books I'm giving away, I have a download library of rare, more than 3,000 titles of old, rare manuscripts that are for free downloads to go along with the metaphysics articles that I audiobooks on the resources I used when I taught metaphysics at Harvard. And basically, I offer these like shareware because I want people to have their own conclusions. This is the resource I used. This is the quote I used from. What is your conclusion? And having some discussion, because my guess is there are as many different religions out there as there are individuals. And the only thing for church is for fellowship in reinforcing certain values that you would like to hold as true.
Exactly. I'll tell you what, it's been a pleasure to interview you tonight. As always, I just love you, and I know everybody else does too. And thank you for joining us. And you're such a gift to everybody. Don't forget that, okay? You really are. Your intellect is so impressive, and I have such respect for your knowledge. And thank you for sharing. You've given so much to everybody, your knowledge. I mean, people, please access Dr. Richard Allen Miller's website and purchase his books and support him. He needs your support, and I want everybody to make sure that they support you because it's awesome. And where are you lecturing again one more time?
Well, I'm going to start with a group of Unity churches, a whole bunch of Unity churches, metaphysical libraries, that have me come in and do a 2-hour evening discussion on weirdness. And then the next morning, I do an 8-hour intensive on how to develop ESP or instinctual values, or how to do Tai Chi. Paranormally, I'm going to be doing a bunch of things. Well, part of that one workshop will include brain drivers that I'm going to give to everybody to show what virtual audio can do when you use it as a tool for brain entrainment and training.
So the brain drivers, is that a headset?
They're based on Robert Monroe's work at Berkeley, and now the Monroe Institute on the East Coast were called HemiSync, HoloSync, and all the other things where you put stereo headphones on 38 and 48 hertz and you drive the brain down to 10 hertz.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we're out of time here, and thank you so much, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. It's a pleasure as always. Everybody, thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dungeon Mecki. Coming up next to sell you on tonight from Down Under, as they always do with their wonderful show. Thanks for the questions in chat, everybody. Thank you again, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. We just love you, and you have a wonderful weekend. Take care, everybody.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free, but there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of